We're good?
And we are live. Apologies for the delay. I had some technical difficulty.
Well, I still can't get it to stream to Instagram, so I'll
Okay.
deal with that later. But so in addition to that technical difficulty, I also bought a microphone this week for my TikToks, and it's compatible with my iPhone, so I assumed it'd be compatible with my Mac. And as we've logged on, I realized it is not. I will
Oh,
still sound obnoxious, but man, my TikToks are coming in crisp.
you
So
do not sound obnoxious. You might just be needing this adapter here, like this. Just a little tip for everybody. You just need an
maybe,
adapter. You might just need an
maybe.
adapter.
We do talk about the importance of adaptability, so there is a very tangible example of that.
There you go. All right.
So, uh, thank you for anybody joining us for your patience. I don't think Raquel or I claim to be technology experts, and
Definitely
we
not.
might be figuring it out, but, if Zoom is allowed to update, so are we.
Yes.
So, last time we talked about authenticity. And this time we said we're going to talk about the excuse of niceness. So, we like to talk about things that you don't normally see, especially on LinkedIn. And eventually, maybe you'll see it on other platforms if we can ever figure any of this out. So, I know last week, Raquel, you left us with a question, which was, is the workplace ready for authenticity? I posted that earlier on some of my pages, and so far people have been like, no.
No.
What do you think?
From my experience, we're not, right? I think that there is just like everything else that is trending, right? We had DEI was trending for a while, and the inclusivity was trending, and women. And I think that we go through these trending things that sounds nice, and people like to, again, put it on a banner, make their slogan. But when it comes down to actually do the work and understand that we are human beings, we have flaws just as much as we have qualities, and it's okay. It's not a problem. Now, my experience is that I could be myself as long as I was benefiting the environment, right? The moment that so if I was too opinionated on the things that mattered to them was fine. But once I started having an opinion on things that they didn't want to go there, including DEI, including women's empowerment, including things that were not necessarily topics that they wanted to discuss, then I was a problem. Then it wasn't so nice for me to say those things. So, like we were even talking about how today I don't have makeup on and I'm wearing a t-shirt, right? And then seeing as unprofessional in some settings. But that's how I am today. I didn't have time to do these things, but does that make me less professional, therefore less capable? But at the same time, I'm being authentic. So I don't think we are, because we're still expected to, you can't be late for work. I mean, if you have to just get up earlier, as if, people like me that have ADHD, who have fibromyalgia, mornings are terrible, absolutely terrible. And the amount of, I have to wake up at least 3 hours before I go to work to be able to get there somewhat on time. And
Ooh.
it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But if you're not, then you're seen as, again, unprofessional, and you can't show your weaknesses. You can't show that you might need, that
And
your needs may be
accommodation.
different. Yeah. And not even from like a disability, because I could go that route. But I think it's so unnecessary that I have to make a legal request in order for people to understand that here, I understand that you want me to be here at 9 a.m., but it's very hard for me. And there are going to be days that I'm going to be here at 9:30. And that does not change the quality of my work, the quality of my leadership. It does not change that. The team does not see me differently, because they know me. They know that the 30 minutes that I'm not there, it's not going to make or break their day or the department. So I think that that part of authenticity, that part of me saying these things, or like, hey, I'm in pain, and you being able to handle that. People are not used to that. And on a day to day, especially in the work environment. So that's my thought.
I have, as always, you have given me kernels of things that I'm thinking on and want to talk about. To get to my answer, I think that the current environment is not set up to support it. I think that people, though, in the lower tiers, the entry level, are starting to want it. And I think we
Mhm.
see evidence of this. So you and I both have speaking engagements this same day, actually Thursday, different
Yes.
events. And I've been prepping for mine on, when my work on the unwritten rules of work and such. And I've been asking my following, because it's not that work suddenly had unwritten rules. It's not that work suddenly became inauthentic, but I've asked them, like, what shifted? When did this become something that you're just not accepting anymore? And
It's a
they
great
had
one.
they had several answers, and I think that that's something that, leaders need to take note of, because it's not that these things just appeared and they'll go away. They've always been there, but there have been shifts in why people aren't willing to handle it anymore.
Yeah.
And one of those that I kept hearing is, well, it used to be worth it to play the corporate game. There used to be more rewards. The cost of living versus compensation wasn't so bad. And there were other benefits, right? And you didn't need to get 3 degrees to have an entry level job. I mean, I'm being a little bit of exaggeration, but
No, but yes.
education cost has gone higher, more education expectations for lower status jobs. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say we see master's level jobs for $12 an hour on Indeed. That's not an exaggeration. That's a real thing. So there's that it just doesn't seem to be worth the extra labor anymore. And also there's the pandemic. I think since, I mean, obviously your field, hospitality, y'all couldn't do that remotely,
No.
but I think whether you were a frontline worker or remote, you saw how quickly things changed, and you're like, "Oh, so y'all can change things." Oh, and
Yes.
you also saw how much care your employer took for your safety if you were on the front line.
Mhm.
And then if you were at home, you also saw, wow, that's a lot of work I spend every day having to adjust what I wear on my whole body, having to constantly be on when it's not that there aren't, problems with virtual or microaggressions, and that, I mean, I got gym shorts on under this. I'm only like this from the waist up from working today. But it's a different kind, and that there was more of a break
Yeah.
of that. It wasn't all the time. That I think those 2 things really have increased the demand. What we've seen, there's a lot of research on that people are expecting their employers to be more socially involved now. They're expecting their employers to, like you said, there's the DEI, and I've done a lot of DEI work with different organizations, and there's usually 2 camps. The "we don't wanna do any of this," and the "nothing is good enough."
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is rooted in, a lot of it seems performative. Nobody care It's Pride Month. Nobody cares if you hang a pride flag
Yeah.
if you don't have a plan for what happens when your employees come out. And
100%.
feel
Yeah.
like they have to come out and they're not just accepted.
Yeah.
Um, so that if you saw people saying that they don't use pronouns when we all use pronouns, like if you said you used a pronoun. So, and I have some mercy there. I posted my monthly blog this month, and I wrote it about how I used to be like that. So, sometimes authenticity is saying you screwed up. So I think people are
100%.
demanding it more. But I think it's still at the lower levels, and I don't think leadership always sees what is a trend, because a trend already sounds inauthentic, right? What is a trend, and what is a consequence of all of these social environmental events?
And So you said, you say leadership, and it depends on the leadership. It's
Mm.
usually, and this from my experience, I could be completely wrong on this, okay, on any other environment that I didn't work, the time that I work where I worked. But it tends to be older, white man. They are the hardest ones to do that because they have never had to deal with that to get to where they wanted. They never had to worry about women's rights in the workplace. They
Mm.
never had to worry about changing. They never had to make accommodations in order to have the positions that they had. Everybody else had to make those accommodations for them. So now that they are in a senior leadership position, right? They are the CEOs, in my case, the general managers, the director, area, whatever it is, they say, I work hard to get here. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want and not evolve with the times that we're living. It's a different world right now because you were saying earlier how why did people care about these things now? In hospitality, we can do a housekeeper can go and you know, scrub toilets for strangers all day long, make those beds. And let me tell you, if you think housekeeping job is easy, try to clean a bedroom, try to clean a hotel room of people that are nasty. And I mean, like,
But
they,
people who know they don't have to clean up after themselves.
yes. And sometimes they purposely make things dirty because they can, right? And they destroy things and there's food everywhere. And don't even get me started on things that can happen in the bathroom. Like, it just gets out of control. So you can have that, or they can go deliver DoorDash for the same amount of hourly rate that they were making with no stress, and they can work they can stay with their family. If they want to work more hours, they can.
Choose their own hours.
Yeah. So if you don't make an environment where they feel welcoming, where their work is actually meaningful, I
Or
think
pay
we
them for the
yes.
labor you're doing.
Yes, I think that when we had the pandemic, there is a mass mentality shift of what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my time? How long until we get another pandemic or something else that is going to close everything? And what am I going to do? So I think a lot of the mentality has shifted, but the work environment hasn't caught up to that. And they think it's just, as you said, it's just going to be a phase, is going to go away, but it's not. Because when there's a mentality change, there's a reality change. And that's what happened when we go from, all the eras in our history, industrials, and now like, who would think in the 80s that we would be completely technology oriented now? And
Mhm.
it's not, but there's a shift in mentality. If you don't keep up with it, you're going to die like the dinosaurs did. You have to adapt. You have
Right.
to keep up.
And we talked about that in our first episode of, like, how media had to adapt with all the technology, and, like, the
Yes.
newspapers that did not adjust to an online platform did not make it.
Yeah.
And, I was thinking earlier today because we're preparing for our talks, and even though we do this, you still always wanna update yourself, right? And, I you brought up that we see a lot of resistance from the same group, and part because I'm a class researcher, part of me is like, it appears to be the same group because there are still not things that aren't as visible pieces of
Mm.
diversity that people have, like white men with disabilities, completely different experience. White men
Mm.
in poverty, completely different experience.
Yes.
But there is also, as you've pointed out, like with like COVID wasn't just this 2 week like trend, right? As we all thought, 2 weeks, right? We all felt that it was not 2 weeks, it was 2 years. Um, and, like, that was
Oh,
a disruptor, but there are also other disruptors of why do we see the same group and why have they said, "Well, it didn't used to be this way." I mean, if you are somebody who's about to retire right now, you have likely worked through, unless you're retiring really early, which in your case, go off, congratulations.
yeah, yeah.
But, like, if you're somebody who's, in their late 60s, 70s, like, you've been alive and working in times when there weren't protections for people who were pregnant, so they had to leave work or they didn't get their job back. The Jim Crow laws could have still been in place for, racial discrimination, and, I mean, just so many other things that adding those in, and, like, now that we have people, which was the right thing to do,
Yeah.
does mean that now there's just not one way to do things, and now people do ask questions, and they wanna feel like they belong and have the same sense of belonging and happiness, and that everybody else has. So,
Correct.
and there's also that as it's interesting, as technology has evolved, people in the US at least are working more. And so there is, instead of like the machines doing things for us,
Yeah.
they seem to be being used to have us work longer and be available all the time. So I think that ties back to what people said, it's just not worth it anymore.
Yeah. And with that, linking to what we're going to say, which is niceness and, the excuse of niceness. A lot of people have been noticing that they are not, as you mentioned, genuine. They are just, oh, but they're nice. So it's fine, because they got away with that, I think, for a long time, because bosses in the past, because I refuse to call these people leaders, it's reality. These bosses, they were used to nicely say that people suck, right? They would nicely say that you're not doing a good job. And because they were nice and they were not the screaming people,
Mm.
they were preferred. And they learned that if they are, they say things in the nice tone, they can get away with things that other people that scream, that are seen as a negative, they can get more with them. But nowadays, we do see that, we see through it, and it's no longer between the boss that screams and the boss that doesn't scream. It's the boss who cares about me, genuinely care about me.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we still have a lot of the niceness, because now, especially now, with everybody trying to, not trying, with people being more aware of what they can say, cannot say, their attitudes, because they know, because even though they're not changing, they know that there's change and they know what can affect them. They are like, oh, I'm going to use my niceness now. I'm going to use my nice voice. I'm going to use my nice tone. So they can't really say that I said it, because are they going to interpret it like that? And I've seen the things like that where I had to say to an hourly, I was already a manager, and I had to say to an hourly associate, I was like, what he said to you, it's not okay, just so you know. Oh no, it's okay, it's okay. And she was older too, and like double my age. And so she comes from a culture of like, no, it's fine, at least he's not, and she said, at least he's not like the other that yells at us. I was like, none of them is okay. Nobody should be talking to you in any tone in that way. You need to be respected. It doesn't matter how nice they sound, is the content of what they're saying.
That's been my experience as well, and something that I try to be really aware of as a white woman, because I feel like, so white women are in an interesting position of that, because we're women, we aren't allowed to show emotions because we're at work, because then we're emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think all there's research for decades showing all women at work experience that to different degrees. It's worse if you're a woman of color and or if you're disabled, then it's extra.
Oh, trust me, the Latinas, the moment I raise my voice, she's just crazy Latina. So
Right.
trust me, I get it.
But then the white, because it is more, and this is, I shared a video today on the intercultural conflict inventory, that
Mm-hmm.
some cultures, it's a quadrant of 4, and some cultures are allowed to show emotion and some aren't. And so that's why I say, as a white woman, because usually Eurocentric white cultures show less emotion. And I think that's enforced in work cultures of more white culture, because a lot of it has been led by white, usually men, for decades in the US in particular. And so I think as white women, we can say harmful things, but we say it like this, and we think that that's fine. And it can also go the other way, of that you really just want to smack somebody and be like, I already said this, but then you're like, oh, I can't, or they'll think I'm crazy, right? So that's just something I try to be really mindful of, because I have seen many leaders, but are particularly ones that look like me, say some terrible things, but like this, and be like, but I'm being so nice. And it just makes me, and that's, still there's still there, and there's some class nuance in there as well, because like I research class, right? And that's more like an upper middle class thing, because in the working class, you don't do that. You get to the point, you're more allowed to show emotions, you're direct. And so it's just a different experience to me that I'm like very aware of. Um, because to me, if you say you're going to do something to and you're nice and then you don't do it, I don't I don't think that's nice.
Yeah,
I think that's dishonest. And that's
100%.
because of my cultural background. While other people maybe don't perceive it that way, but I think that's the value of having conversations about things like the intercultural conflict inventory, right? Like, how do you approach conflict? I approach it head on, but that's not corporate culture.
Now, I mean, I it's funny because you're saying these things, and I'm like just thinking of all of the times that I was told that I needed to be nicer. And I always say, I don't need to be nice because I am kind. People know that I'm kind. People know that I care, but I didn't fit the stereotypical women in leadership that had to have like a softer tone. And
Mhm.
it's funny how that happened in the beginning. It has always happened every time I started at a new job, which has been a few times. And especially as a leader, where people tend to take me, they used to take me very, they used to be a kind of, having a hard time finding the word for this. They didn't know what to expect, right? Because I would say things very punctual. I was never rude. I was never unprofessional. But this isn't what it needs to get done. This is what we're going to get done. And it wasn't until maybe just a few years ago that somebody said like, well, you know, that's a behavior that is not expected of women. That's why people see you like that. Like,
Yeah.
who does she think she is? And I'm like, but I am very grateful that even though I was born and raised in Brazil, you know, I went to school in Brazil, I have two older sisters, and my mom has, with all her flaws, she had a great quality that she made sure that we spoke in a matter that it didn't matter my gender. It
Mm.
didn't matter. I would speak the way I speak. I don't care if, you know, my older sister, she went to she got a degree in engineer, and all of her friends, I think her class had about 300 people total, and there was only, I think, like a handful of women. So I grew up with a lot of men around the house because they were always studying, and that's all her friends. And
Mhm.
so I'm used to, because they talk in that tone, I talk in that tone. My older sister talks on that tone, and she in Brazil, she suffers the same issues of, you know, being a woman in leadership. And also, she said something the other day to me. She's like, Raquel, I had a boss, I had a, you know, a female leader that told her, she said, it's funny how they see us as their mother, the motherly figure, and they expect us to treat them as such. So they'll come to you like, oh, you know, but I really need this, or can you do this? Or they expect you to understand them from that perspective. But I have no children. I don't want to have any children. Exactly. This is one of the main reasons why I don't. But they do that. And she's like, it's such a balancing act to figure it out how to be firm, but not act and not sound like I'm, you know, yelling at them. I gave up on that a long time ago.
So
But
this is called the double bind, which is that we our stereotype of a leader, or it's more than a stereotype, it's like an imprint. And
Mhm.
this varies by culture. So I'm talking in the West, the imprint of the leader in the US is agentic. Agentic qualities are things like being decisive, authoritative, direct. But
Mm,
where we run into trouble is that we also assign other identities those traits. And
mhm,
one of them is to be male,
mhm.
and we expect men to be that way.
Yeah.
Now, women, we expect to be communal, which is nurturing, forgiving, kind, etc. So the double bind that women run into is if I act like a leader, which I would argue There are many types of leadership. They're not all agentic. Then I'm being a bad woman. And that's when you get called all kinds of nice names. And at the least profane, you're told you're bossy. While a man would not be seen that way because he's being a good leader and a good man. But if you are a good woman and you're kind and nurturing, then you're not perceived as good for leadership. Even though some of those traits, research has shown for certain leadership situations, or even for many of them, matter and are
Yeah.
effective. But our perception of leadership does not match leadership effectiveness. We know that from a lot of research.
Yeah.
But I relate to what you said in that I have 5 brothers. And I spent my teen years with just living with my father and my brothers. And when my parents divorced, I stayed with my dad. So you just made me think, because we did definitely have gender roles in my family. I mean, we were very traditional, but you just made me think, my directness I've always attributed to being from like a blue collar rural area, but it's also because I was fighting 5 men all the time. Not even fighting, but just talking and
Yeah. And you talk one to one because at that moment there is no gender. You're just talking to another person and you speak on the same you speak the same language.
like the
That's it.
Disney movie Aristocats, when I don't know if you've seen it, but at one point the
I was
girl
very
cat
young when I
goes,
did.
"I'm a lady," and the brother cats go, "You're not a lady, you're a sister." And that is brothers. They weren't like, "Oh, she's a lady, she's gonna speak communally." They were like, "Get over here!" And I was like, "No," and they were like, "Fine," I mean. So I think, my brothers gave me all my audacity, I tell you.
Which is good. And I think that that's why for us it's really hard to be in those environments where, again, right, like I'm expected to be nice and I'm not nice. I'm kind, but kindness is not even understood at this point. And I, a few years ago, I was opening a hotel here in Chicago. I was part of the opening team, and the CEO, Nikki Lindakis, she was the CEO of the company at the time. And she gave a speech that I still remember to this day because it was so impactful. She was saying, first of all, very, very kind woman, extremely intelligent, extremely like have nothing negative to say about her as a leader, of course, because that's the only. But she, during her speech, she said she was telling the story of her career and how when she started, she thought that in order to grow, she had to become the male version of herself. So she said, I caught myself wearing really short hair and just really tight, really not tight, really dark suits with no color and trying to be very firm and very dry all the time. And she said, she's like, it was not until I embraced that I am kind, that I am empathetic, that I have these qualities that I can bring to the table in addition to the qualities that I have, the other qualities that are not necessarily associated to the gender specific. She's like, that's when I started to actually grow, not just as a leader, but as a person. And she said that this was in I think it was in 2014, 2015. And I still remember I remember her speaking because they had such a big impact on me because it's like, that is so true. And I see that till this day, women that they have morphed into like an exterior man stereotype, right? Like they have the short hair, they talk very firm, and you're like, where are you? Because that's not you, And again, it comes back to to the niceness. They sound nice, but they're not. They are just they're trying to be something that they're not, and it's showing. It shows. And they might have gotten away with that for a long time, but again, we're looking for authenticity. We're looking for real people these days.
I think, and the thing is, it doesn't benefit most people to have a role that only fits one type of person. And when I give workshops, I like to show this scenario that I'm sure many people have heard before, of a father and son are in a car accident. The
Mm,
boy is fine. The father needs surgery immediately. They rush him to the hospital. The surgeon goes in the OR and says, I can't operate on this person. He's my husband. And the first time I encountered that, which was like, 15 years ago, I've admitted I have been sexist before. I was like, huh? And then, and so when I ran into it again, like 5 years ago, I was like, growth, it's a woman. And then I showed it to my students, and one of my students goes, but what if it was a gay man? And I was like, you mean I'm homophobic too? Because that's the thing about is that, yes, while it disproportionately impacts women, it also disproportionately impacts people of color. It also disproportionately impacts gay men. It also isn't in line. I mean, like, there's just so many things,
Yeah.
and I think that's part of the frustration people get, and people get defensive about if you talk about any identity group having a different experience, even if it's well documented. And part of that is defensiveness and privilege. And part of it is also not feeling seen for I'm trying to conform to this too, and it also sucks.
Yeah.
Right? Because not every man wants to be the big macho man,
No.
right? That has to do this. Like some men want to be a team player. They want to be kind. And having the idea of a role that only fits a narrow version of people is just I'm not gonna say it's pointless because there is a point. The point is to keep one type of person rewarded, but it's harmful.
Oh, very. I mean, the pointless, it means that, it's, as you said, just one person, one type of people win. And then we get where we are. And, the there is an overwhelming feeling nowadays, right? Like you don't need to be talking to anybody. You can feel there's like a shift in something, right? Like, things are not the same. You can feel that, right? Things are not the same. And again, I keep saying this over and over again. If the people who are the decision makers of companies, of any kind of workplace, if they don't understand that there has been a shift and they're not attuned to that, and they keep saying, no, we are the drivers. We are going to tell you what to do. You're not going to shift. You're going to shift back to where we were. It's going to break. That's the response. That's the answer to that. And
There are
we've
a lot
seen
more
that.
workers than there are. And I mean, numbers game wise, there's a lot more workers, but when the workers fight each other, that's when, they divide their resources. I'm not promoting fighting,
No, no,
but
no. But
it is a number. When you look at the numbers, it's people are resisting, the culture is
yeah,
shifting. And it's so when we first talked about doing this episode, we were talking about, fake niceness. And I remember telling you that it reminds me of how people talk to dogs. Because
yes,
when we had a puppy when we were kids, one of my 5 brothers, he was 6 years younger than me, my brother Max. And he was like, "Oh, the dog." And Max is a golden retriever. Max is a puppy. And he was like so excited. He's like, "Oh yeah, the dog knows what I'm saying. We're gonna go play." And I was like, "Max, whatever you say in a happy tone, the dog's gonna do."
yeah.
And I remember he went, and he goes, "Bad boy, buddy. Bad boy. You're so," and the dog is just, like, so happy, jumping, ready to go play. And he looked at me and goes, "You're right." And it was so cute and it was so funny. But when I see at work these
Yeah,
same tactics used, I just think people aren't dogs.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
We
if
can we can
if you
we can
said
hear we can hear it.
that's the difference between people and I mean, like, love dogs, thank God we have them, but people
Yeah,
aren't dogs. And just because you said it in a nice tone doesn't mean
yeah,
that you didn't lose trust, that they're gonna be committed to your organization, that they're gonna do a good job, that the problem maybe they presented to you is now avoided. I
yeah,
mean, those outcomes that are coming, they're not oblivious to that either.
yeah. And I mean, you grew up in the South, right? I think that are used to a very famous
Yes,
saying.
yes. With the very famous Southern saying that is nice, but it's not. The
Mm,
bless your heart. And the South, so there's actually research on that. The South is very nice. The Southern hospitality comes from try, the, compensating for mostly racism, for that history.
yeah.
And that is, it's not something we're proud of. And the trying to cushion it. And there's a lot I like about my culture and our funny sayings, but it is a prime example of, oh, bless your heart means you're dumb. You should have thought about that again. Um, yeah, yeah,
But it's true, right? Like, and it's funny because m- the Brazilian culture is very different. We are a very direct culture. I was looking at this post the other day, and like there's some accounts on social media that this American man and women, they go to live in Brazil, so they say how they are experiencing Brazil through the eyes of Americans. And two of them actually already done a post like this about dating in Brazil, because we there is no being played. It's either, hey, I like you, oh, I like you too, hey, I don't like you, don't talk to me. Like, there is no, like, we don't want to waste any time with anything. There's no game, we're not playing any games.
I feel like
And
I just
I remember,
understand a whole new level of you.
like, and it's so funny because when I first moved to the States, I didn't know that that was, a thing. So I remember asking, which I'm not going to say who, but this was like, mind you, this was many, 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 that was even before I was divorced, married, and all of that. And I asked this guy that I liked, and I said, he had like an on and off thing with his girlfriend, with this girl. And I look at him, I was like, but do you even love her? And he's like, I don't even know you. Why are you asking me this? I'm like, because I kind of need to know. Because if you listen, if this is not gonna work, like, but I think that that is right. So, and so we're not used to also this whole niceness thing. So it to me is very apparent when I'm like, that's, you definitely had like, a, a cruel intention in there behind those words, because I can see through it like a lot easier, I think. And but yeah, it's just very funny how being somebody who grew up in a different culture, very different in many aspects, being introduced. But here's the thing though, like me, the majority of my adult life I spent here. My entire work experience has been here, like 99.8% has been here. So I only know work here, but with a culture that is not from here. So so the way I experience it, it is different, right? And we talk about being an outsider, being like somebody with fresh set of eyes and seeing things different. That to me has always been an advantage. And the people on my teams and the leaders above me who knew how to use that to see what I was saying, what I was thinking, because I've always been very attuned to problems such as, women in a work environment, and LGBTQ plus communities, and how we talk to them, and what is acceptable, what is not. I've always been very respectful of everything, even if I don't know religions, even, right? Like, I think for the first time I worked with somebody that I knew it was Muslim, was because in Brazil there is no Muslim. Like, we don't, Jews, like Jewish people are very, very, like, there's not a lot either. So I'm not exposed to it. I don't understand the culture. And I remember working with her, and I just start conversation. I asked her questions, but because, again, I wasn't being nice, I was being authentic, kind, and respectful. And I asked her questions that, I was like, hey, so how about this? And then she would open up to me and she would tell me, because she could feel and knew that I wasn't just trying to, judge her. I was literally curious because I wanted to understand, and not just to understand from a personal level, but how I can better serve her as a leader, because that is part of who she is. And she needs sometimes time off to do things. When they were doing Ramadan, I was like, do you want? She's like, no, it's fine. I was like, no, I don't have an issue putting you like on overnights or whatever, so you can adapt to you. I don't have to do that, but I want to do that.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that, again, it comes back to like authenticity and just wanting to lead people. And that's the thing. If you want to be a leader, you want to lead people. Otherwise, you can be a manager, you can be a supervisor, but you're not allowed to call yourself a leader. You can't read a book. You cannot read it. You can tell me, "Ugh, that's going to be a personal one now." I can't. I had this boss that he's like, as soon as I started, he was like, no, because I read all about servant leadership. And I'm sorry. And where are you being a servant leadership? Like
What you said last week of
he was
knowing
all,
is different
he
than
would,
being.
yes, he would tell me all the time, I'm here for you because without you, we don't do anything. I was like, okay, so this is what I need. Oh, but I can't do that. Oh, but we can't do that. I was like, so you're not here for me. You're here to say that you're here for me, but you're not here for me. Like the fact that I tell you, like, hey, again, I can't be here at 9:30. I can't be here right on a dot 9 o'clock every day. And you tell me that I have to, that there is no excuse. How are you serving me on that? You know what I'm saying? So I think that there's so much talk about, we talked about this last time too, about, oh, if I look at LinkedIn, one more LinkedIn post about this type of leadership, this is what leadership looks like. A leader is somebody, come on, people, like we know this. And it might feel
Not
nice.
acting on it.
Yeah, it might feel nice for you to read it and read 1,000 books on it, but it's time for you to start actually doing it. I did a whole uh, post, like a whole sequence of posts on knowledge, having knowledge and applying it, two different things. Knowledge is only power if you actually use it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just
I
knowing things.
yeah, I agree with you, and I posted also on one of my accounts today that if you wanna be the leader that you feel like when you listen to your leadership podcasts, you have to build a culture that people don't just fit into, but a culture that has the capacity to survive with a lot of different cultures.
Yeah,
Sort of embrace.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
We are over time.
I mean, at this point, I think we should just make it official that it's going to be between 45 minutes and an hour.
So to wrap up, we recapped on authenticity and your question on is the workplace ready? And the workplace isn't ready, but I think the culture has shifted and that people want it and people are asking for it, demanding it even. We talked about niceness versus kindness and that people aren't dogs.
I was going to say how not to talk to people with like that.
So, is there anything that you wanted to add before we close out?
No, and I don't have a question this time. I think people need to maybe take a break from a question, unless you have one, but I
I
don't.
don't have a question, but if anybody watching has one, happy to bring it up next time.
And also, if you guys don't feel comfortable, because we know that these topics are very sensitive, I would say. If you don't want your bosses or coworkers knowing that you're watching, and you still want to comment, please feel free to message. We promise we won't say your name, who you work for, or anything like that. But I think it's important that we bring the conversation what you guys are experiencing as well, so we can talk about that as well, right? We have our idea what's important, and that's what we're talking about. But if you have a topic, if you have a suggestion, if you have a comment, an opinion, and you just don't want people to know that it's you and you have that opinion, trust me, we will love to hear from you. Do it as a DM. As I said, I promise we won't screenshot that and like hold you, hostage,
No
right? Like, I
blackmail.
promise. I promise.
No
Just
blackmail.
yeah, no, not at all. But do, because we're doing this to start the conversation. To I think when we thought about this, my initial thing is I'm tired of knowing these things and sideline talking about it and not broadcasting this and not making it public that this is a topic that people are talking about, and being scared of, if my boss is going to read it and I can't say it because the company is going to think this and that. And I think the idea was that is that these are conversations that people are having, that or if they're not, they need to be having, and they're real. So
Yeah.
that's my TED talk. Thank you.
Loved it. All right. Well, we will talk again next week.
Sounds good. I'll see you guys then.
Bye.
Bye. If I can press.